With Barcelona's recent uptick in form, a lot of people seem to have forgotten the dangerous situation the Blaugrana were navigating in until a few months ago. And so, here we are. For the third time in 4 videos on my channel, we'll be talking about things related to this club. We started with the video on Neymar, had a conversation about Messi and Ronaldo, and now we're finally going to talk about the Catalonian club. Actually, this time we're not just talking about small stuff surrounding the team. This time, we're going into the mechanisms and Barca's rise, fall, and now rise again. People from the older generation will remember that in the 2010s, Barcelona were an incredibly dominant team, one capable of bringing 7 or 8 players to their national teams, with the likes of Busquets, Alba, Pedro, and so forth. A lot of talent was emerging in those years, and this was coupled in with a golden period for the club. Several players reaching their primes. Lionel Messi is the main example, the golden goose, but also various other players were on that list. Gerard Piqué, who endured a spell at United, returning and becoming a stable part of the team. Victor Valdés, who rose through the C team, the B team, and eventually got to the main squad. Cesc Fabregas, whose spell, while short, already gave plenty of reasons to have him as the next big thing. All these were graduates from La Masia, who were coming out to play in the big leagues, and this gave way to a glorious period for the Blaugrana, culminated with the win in 2015 of the acclaimed treble under Luis Enrique, producing one of the most dominant trios ever. The MSN has since been regarded as the greatest attacking force ever to grace this game, with Lionel Messi leading Neymar, one of the greatest wingers of his generation, if not all time, and Suarez, the most complete striker in that period. For many Barcelona fans, the only way to go from there was up. They would manage to double again the following year. But then, in 2017, what many regarded as the first great problem appeared. Neymar did not want to stay at the club, seeking greener pastures elsewhere. Maybe Paris? The Catalonian side, however, rests a bit easier knowing that no club could physically meet his gargantuan release clause of 222 million. Also, a few days after this news broke out, the mood had started to shift, with Neymar now changing his mind, saying that he preferred to stay. So the club was in disbelief when the media began reporting that the clause had been met and Neymar would be leaving the club, breaking up this legendary trio. Barcelona had problems now. A key puzzle piece had gone missing, and they needed to replace it quick. Thankfully, they got a hefty sum from the deal, so they decided to use half of that money to buy a player who at the time was lighting things up in Dortmund, a young Frenchman by the name of Ousmane Dembélé, spending 120 million for him. It looked like for the time being Barca had managed to resolve a potential situation, but if that was the case, then we wouldn't be making this video. Dembélé picked up a serious injury in his first start for the club and was ruled out for 4 months. By now, it was too late to fix the situation, so they had to endure until the next transfer window. Despite this small hiccup, Barcelona would still manage to win the league that year, with Messi and Suarez combining for 59 goals. In the winter, they would try to replace Dembélé, spending another 100 million, this time shopping in England, more precisely Liverpool, getting a talented Brazilian with quick feet who had made a name for himself around there, Philippe Coutinho, who was coming off the back of a few incredible seasons at Anfield. With the money Liverpool got from him, among other purchases, they would also sign Van Dijk to the team. This will become important later. That season, Barcelona suffered embarrassment in the Champions League after leading with a 4-1 advantage against Roma in the home leg of the quarterfinals. They would see themselves out of the competition, a 3-0 defeat in Rome. This would certainly not be the last time something like this happens, as the following year they would lose in humiliating fashion against Liverpool, after they held an imposing 3-0 advantage at home. The famous corner taken quickly would send them out of the tournament, with the defensive wall of Van Dijk making sure to not let anything pass. In 2019, maybe to save face and try to make the team stronger to be able to cope with these kind of games, for the third time they would spend over 100 million on one player, bringing in Antoine Griezmann from their rivals Atletico Madrid, also signing Frankie de Jong in the same window. They would manage to loan out Coutinho to Bayern Munich after 2 very unimpressive campaigns, getting him momentarily off their payroll. Also, a major change would be made at the helm, as the coach Ernesto Valverde, who brought some decent success to Barcelona winning the league, was sacked in favor of Quique Setién, who had never won a major trophy. An odd replacement, but hey, why not? The situation would just keep going downwards, as they were adding more players on their already limited payroll, signing Pjanic in a swap deal with Arthur. The Bosnian was going to occupy a space which already had 3 players for it, making many question the logic behind this deal. Their €100 million player Griezmann never really took off and couldn't really find form for them, so that year ended with them losing the league to Real Madrid. What was maybe even worse, however, was the CL campaign, a brutal 8-2 defeat to Bayern Munich in the quarterfinals, bringing all the coolers to that harsh reality. They were no longer among the elites of football. To add insult to injury, Coutinho would bag a brace against them. This would be more than enough for the board to let go of Setién, replacing him with ex-Barca player Ronald Koeman, who would make a return to the club coaching the first team. In the summer window of 2020, Barca would have more bad news, with Suarez leaving the club in favor of their rivals Atletico Madrid. Things would take a turn for the worse when their star Lionel Messi would go on record saying that he wanted to leave the club but legally couldn't. At this point, the whole club would be in complete shambles, and it was apparent to everyone. A bit later that year, one of the brightest talents out of La Masia, Ansu Fati, would begin a series of concerning injury problems that would see him miss more and more games and eventually loaned out to Brighton. The winner of the La Liga that year, Atletico Madrid, with a super Luis Suarez carrying them, scoring 21 times in the league. Yeah, safe to say they weren't happy with that one in Catalonia. With the upcoming summer, Barca had a chance to rebuild. They made some good free signings with the likes of Aguero and Depay joining the club. They would also have to face terrible news, and for me, the second big point in this Barca decline, because this was a whole saga that went on for quite a while. With Messi's contract expiring, management was scrambling to get him a new one and keep him in Spain. Unfortunately, they had bit off more than they could chew. The league could no longer overlook their financial status. A new deal had been set up, but La Liga vetoed it, citing financial problems, forcing Barcelona to get rid of their superstar who grew up in the club, with the teary-eyed Argentinian holding a press conference saying goodbye to the club. They would also be hit with a lot of misfortune, as 5 games into their campaign, Aguero had to retire due to heart problems. Griezmann would leave Barcelona, returning to Atletico, as everyone understood that maybe he wasn't the right fix. The replacement for him would be Luuk de Jong. In October, a starless Barcelona would be on the brink of elimination in the group stages for the first time in 20 years in the Champions League, and they would have a series of disastrous results, nearly compromising La Liga. This would lead to Koeman saying bye-bye to Spain in favor of a club legend, with the return of Xavi Hernandez in Barcelona after a few years in Qatar. In January, the first transfer window under their new manager, they would strengthen with Ferran Torres, Aubameyang and Adama Traoré. They would also have the return of Dani Alves, the Brazilian right-back, signing on for 1 year at the club. Form would slowly begin kicking in, but at this point it was a little too late. In Europa League, they would get knocked out by eventual champions Eintracht. To add salt to the wound, they would watch as Real Madrid lift the double, winning the Champions League and the La Liga. So it was back to the drawing board. This time, they were about to undergo their first full season under Xavi, who convinced with some good football the year before. They would sign Lewandowski for 45 million, at the time possibly the best striker in the world, strengthen with Rafinha, who was coming off a great season at Leeds, and sign Jules Koundé, the most exciting defender out of the French roster. They would also try to offload some of their players to be able to fund these signings, finally being able to sell Coutinho for 20 million, a fifth of what they paid. Depay and Aubameyang would leave the Camp Nou in order to make some space for these new players. All this, and they still ran a risk with Koundé, as it wasn't sure whether he could be registered or not. But other than that, their form would start to pick up in the league. Their only negative stain was the loss to Real Madrid in October. Otherwise, it was a pretty positive start to their year. A small hiccup would arrive in November, with Piqué announcing his retirement shortly before the World Cup. However, the Blaugrana would manage to win the title. In Europe, they would see themselves out once again, being knocked out in the round of 32 of the Europa League. At this point, the last time Barca had a decent campaign in the Champions League felt like so long ago, as when they got to the latter stages of the competition, they always suffered embarrassing defeats. And now in Europa League, they couldn't even make it into the main rounds of the competition. But there is a piece of good news. In June of that year, they would finally be able to sell Dembélé to PSG. They still hadn't finished paying him, but at least they could get him off their payroll, signing Gundogan on a free along with João Felix and Cancelo. They would pay the price for this though when in November 2023, Xavi and Alejandro Balde, the latest products out of La Masia, were ruled out for the rest of the season with injuries, forcing Xavi to pick once again from the academy. His choice fell onto a young 16-year-old who was performing very well by the name of Lamine Yamal. At the end of the season, Xavi would be in the midst of a very strange saga. First, he announces his decision to resign as head coach of FC Barcelona. Then, the club manages to make him change his mind, so he announces that him and Barcelona would continue to build on for the future. But then, at the end of the year, after a defeat to PSG in the quarters, with Ousmane Dembélé playing probably the best 2 games he's ever played in the CL, wow, he really did not like being sold. It is announced that Barcelona and Xavi have come to a decision to go their separate ways. Really confusing stuff from the Camp Nou. And a few days later, they would unveil their manager for the 2024-25 season to be Hansi Flick. During this summer, they have tried to sell players that were no longer part of the project, the likes of Serginho Dest and Ansu Fati, to recoup some cash to spend. But they haven't really made any significant signings, apart from one, Dani Olmo for €55 million, joining the Blaugrana. So, now that we've got the whole sporting problem out of the way, let's get into their depth situation. In 2020, Barca would use an emergency transfer granted after not signing a single player in the summer window. This is an emergency signing granted to clubs that could only get a player from the Spanish division. I had no idea this was a thing, honestly. They would spend this transfer on Martin Braithwaite, acquiring him from Leganes. Not someone I would have expected. During COVID, there were a lot of murmurs and unhappy players as their financial situation was really in the dumps, with players having to take pay cuts to be able to register new signings. This got to its peak in 2021, where it was apparent to everyone their issues, with locker room members growing public about it. They would sell off some of their assets to other companies, like a good percentage of their TV rights to 6 cents. Also, the naming rights of the Camp Nou would go to Spotify. This great football field becoming a joke. They would essentially be spending money they don't have and then liquidate assets to pay for it. What is worse is the gap with Real Madrid just keeps growing, with them buying players like Mbappe and Bellingham, while Barcelona struggle to even register players, Dani Olmo being the latest example. The difference between them is night and day. Mismanagement and COVID kicked them to the curb. They also had more money go out to the renovations of the stadium. That's why they had to temporarily move their base of operations to Montjuic for the 2023-24 season. There's a constant need to liquidate assets to be able to spend a small sum on the market. Couple that with the little success they had in recent years on the European stage. That means less prize money to use. Also, their assets are not infinite. They're bound to run out of things to sell. If they don't pull themselves out before, there's a real chance Barcelona can become something of a sleeping giant, like Atletico Madrid, forced to 1 or 2 seasons of success, with the rest of them spent in those top 6 positions. That's why they're trying to target players that can arrive on a free, with transfers like Gundogan and Romeo, who combined cost $3.5 million. But there's also another part to it. In La Liga there exists a spending cap that everyone has to adhere to, a combination of multiple factors, including team revenue and debt repayments among others. Clubs would then get a figure which would be the amount of money allocated to them for spending. So this number changes each year. Barca were actually fined, but not by La Liga, rather by UEFA, with the reason being that they have reported the wrong numbers on their profit report. I'm not saying that they have no money to use, but maybe their sum is quite low. They're also trying to move as many of their assets as they can. They want to sell the remaining available percentage of TV rights and are also trying to break out of their contract with Nike, wanting to have a more lucrative deal elsewhere. But how and why did this once great club end up like this? a lot of people call board mismanagement. So let's have a look. The first great fracture in senior management arrives with the resignation of the president at the club, Josep Bartomeu, in 2020. This would throw the organization into a few weeks of confusion, having to arrange the elections for the next president, which would yield a surprise result: the return of former president Joan Laporta. One of the positive side effects from this would be a small revival of La Masia, who Laporta has a lot of trust in. However, they would end up in a lot of negative press when the Super League was announced, people seeing it as a betrayal on the game. And this one club who revolutionized the modern game, giving us the tiki-taka, was spearheading this new tournament alongside their eternal rivals Real Madrid. This choice was not understood by many. To my knowledge, this plan hasn't been dropped yet. This new Super League is still something that they're trying to create. In 2021, it failed after it was met with a lot of backlash, with fans rioting to get it cancelled, and one by one, the clubs who were invited to participate dropped out, probably due to internal pressure from the board or their fans. The only two teams remaining are the giants of Spain, Barcelona and Real Madrid. This almost sunk their relationship with their fan base. Thankfully, up until now, the Super League project has been deemed a failure. Another tough decision Barca might find themselves having to make is in the event their funds run out. Should they try a desperate move to sell off a part of the club? I bet some of you are confused right now. Let me explain. The Blaugrana operate along an interesting model. The club is 100% owned by members. They're called socios. The thing is, the stocks of the club are very valuable, and selling some of them could prove profitable. However, these socios have both voting power and a say on the decisions made by the club, so I can't imagine they will be happy about it. But doing so would be the quickest way to get a large sum without having to devaluate the team. Otherwise, they have to stick with what they've been doing the last few years. Gathering from La Masia. Even with all the money spent over the seasons, Barcelona still turned to their youth academy with hope. And rightly so. They have one of the best facilities in the world. Over the last few years, multiple players have come through the ranks, like Fermín López, Pau Cubarsí, Marc Guiu, and of course Lamine Yamal. With Bartomeu, the academy kinda went into the shadows for a bit, as he preferred a policy focused on acquiring foreign players rather than picking from the B team. Another thing was the pressure they faced to live up to their expectations, as at the time, every decent player that came out of the academy was dubbed the next Messi. The likes of Giovanni dos Santos, Riqui Puig, or Bojan Krkić. Other than that, La Masia has always been ahead of their time, giving us players like Guardiola, Puyol, and Messi. In more recent years, we can find Ansu Fati, Pedri, and Xavi. This is in part thanks to Laporta's return, who had the opposite idea, to build with the youth team, reducing costs as well, because there is no need to go through agents and pay high fees to sign players. During the past decade, they built on this tiki-taka style of play that has already been imprinted into their youth team. So the players coming into the first team are prepared. Xavi just continued this trend, allowing 15 players to debut under him. He would recognize talent, having once been a La Masia graduate himself, so he knows what it's like. So we talked about a lot of stuff, but how are things now? Well, with Hansi Flick on the bench, things seem to have turned out for the better. Barca are at the time of recording currently unbeaten in La Liga. They would face a small slip-up in the Champions League, losing 2-1 to Monaco. But in Spain, they have a 5 out of 5 record with an emphatic victory on Real Valladolid, with Dani Olmo and Lamine Yamal both in incredible form, having carried it over from the Euros. Rafinha has also seen a rebirth, with 3 goals and 2 assists in those 5 games. The team seems to have adapted quickly to Flick's style. They find themselves top of the table. Let's see if they can maintain that throughout the year. What is certain is that Barcelona, this once great club home of legends like Ronaldinho, Henry, and Messi, went through a really bad period a few years where they risked not seeing the top spot of the league table again. But they navigated expertly through the storm and came out stronger than before. They just have to carry on this mindset into the future.